And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Monday, December 2nd, 2024. And we start with the sea ice. The ice is extensive along the Beaufort Sea coast down into the Chukchi Sea. The area has been filling in north of the Bering Strait. We have much colder temperatures, and we have offshore northeasterly flow through the Bering Strait that's going to turn more northerly over the next couple of days. But with the cold temperatures in place, there's going to be a tendency for some of the ice to want to shift a little more south and westward. That's been the case. We've had a push of cold air come in off the mainland. It's already passed through the Pribilofs and into the central Aleutians. So the northeasterly winds that are coming offshore has a tendency to want to pull some of this ice to the west and south. And with the cold temperatures, there will be additional ice growth along the west coast here as we go through the week. So the setup is such that we have that late in the weekend and early Monday, we had Arctic air push across the Pribilofs and out into the Aleutians now, and it's spun up this weak low. There have been snow showers associated with that feature. And then this is the next system of consequence that's going to be pulling northwestward toward the Alaska Peninsula with this warm front that's going to lift on up into the all along the entire Gulf Coast. This is actually a warmer front than the last one. Has milder air along with more in the way of rain along sea level there at the coast and up into the southern central panhandle. By the time we get into Tuesday afternoon, that front will start to occlude, and it'll be crossing the Alaska Peninsula on Tuesday night. There could be a mix of some precipitation, an icy mix, including a change over to a little light freezing rain or drizzle areas around Bristol Bay, Lake Iliamna, as well as spreading up from the western Kenai, up Cook Inlet, Anchorage Bowl, and up the Susitna Valley, especially Tuesday afternoon and into Tuesday night. Meanwhile, some heavier rain will spread across the panhandle, very messy for places that had heavier snowfall Sunday into Monday. So we're going to see temperatures 40s, even some lower to near mid-50s, Sitka down toward Klawock and Metlakatla, and strong winds along this front. That'll be the other issue. Gale force to near low-end storm force winds along this front as it lifts northward. And by Wednesday, we find the front spanning from Bristol Bay across the Alaska Range up into Cook Inlet to along the northern Gulf Coast into the inner channels of the Panhandle. And that low will continue to lift back toward the north and weaken, but in the process, this front's going to produce some stronger gale force winds Tuesday. Southeast gales 35 knots there, Dixon entrance, waves 15, 17 feet, but northerly winds, Stevens Passage up to Lynn Canal, 20 to 30 knots with gusts of 40 knots there in Lynn Canal, and then winds will be more easterly, 35, 40 knot gales, Sitka, outside the icy strait and outside of Yakutat Bay with waves of 13 to 17 feet. Winds come down a bit on Wednesday. Southeast winds with this warmer air that's overspreading the panhandle be mainly rain, maybe with the exception of up above Haines and Skagway up toward White and Chilkoot passes. But southeast winds anywhere from 15 to as high as 25 knots here. Dixon entrance waves 5 feet around Metlakatla and Ketchikan, 12 feet off of Craig and Sitka, and 25 to 30 knot southeast winds becoming more easterly toward Cape Suckling with 12 to 13 foot waves and periods of lingering rain there. Now on Tuesday, as the front approaches and the area of low pressure is going to be passing south of Kodiak Island, we have east-northeast gales to 45 knots, even 50 knot storm force winds there just northeast of Kodiak Island. Lower and middle Cook Inlet from Anchor Point down to Kamishak Bay, 40 knot northeasterly gales, waves 10 to 12 feet. Northeast winds 30 knots within Prince William Sound and Upper Cook Inlet, Turnagain Arm. So brisk winds there, and again, there could be some light freezing rain, patchy freezing drizzle develop and spread up Cook Inlet into the Susitna Valley. Winds on Wednesday will be generally east-southeast out over the Gulf, 25 to 30 knots. East winds Prince William Sound with 6-foot waves, and then lower Cook Inlet, we're looking at northeast to east winds, 25 to 30 knots with waves upwards of 9 feet there, Kamishak Bay and toward the entrance of Cook Inlet. For Tuesday around Kodiak Island, northeasterly gales, 40 to 45 knots, highest there through Shelikof Strait with 12-foot waves. 30-knot northeast winds out of Bristol Bay and off of Sand Point. As we get down to Cold Bay, False Pass, winds turn northerly at 20 knots, with that low pressure center going to be crossing up through this region here in the central and northern parts of the peninsula for Tuesday night. And then as the low pulls out here just outside of Bristol Bay, we're going to have east-southeast winds 25 to 30 knots around Kodiak Island on Wednesday. Ahead of that, southeast winds 25 knots there east of Chicknick with 9-foot waves. Variable winds around 10 knots there. You get near north and northeast of Cold Bay, waves could still be upwards of 9 feet. And then 7 to 8-foot waves there on the North Pacific side. The Aleutians will see north winds on Tuesday at 25 knots over the far eastern Aleutians around Unalaska. Variable winds 10 knots Nikolsky out through Atka, and then as we get west of Adak, winds shift back around northwest to north 25 to 30 knots. And for Wednesday, winds will generally be out of the west-northwest, eastern and central Aleutians at 20 to 25 knots, turning northerly west of Adak at 20 to 25 knots back through Kiska and Shimia. Along the southwest coast, we continue Tuesday that brisk offshore flow, 25 to as high as 30 knots there out of Bristol Bay, 30 knots there at St. Matthew Island, and easterly winds 15 knots, the Pribilofs. So the ice tendency will be to drift a little further south and west. With the cold air, too, also more ice-making capabilities. The ice will grow. And for Wednesday, with the low pulling up here in the southeast corner of the Bering Sea, just to outside of Bristol Bay, we expect east winds at Bristol Bay 20 knots, northeast winds 20 knots within Kuskokwim Bay. But as we go up the coast, the Yukon coast and the wider expanse here of Norton Sound, north winds 25 knots to 30 knots there at St. Matthew. And for the Bering Strait, north side of St. Lawrence Island, the west side of the Seward Peninsula, winds on Tuesday will be northeasterly to 30 knots, even 35 knots there just north of Gamble. Where there is any open water, you could have waves 8 to 11 feet there on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. As we go up the coast, 25 to 30 knot northeasterly winds from Utqiagvik to Cape Lisburne. And then along the Arctic coast, notice the winds picking up, easterly winds increasing around Kaktovik, Point Thompson, 35 knots. There is a winter storm watch for this area. Could be updated to a blizzard warning because it's going to be mainly one of those ground blizzard blowing snow events there along the eastern Arctic coast. And those brisk winds will continue in the vicinity of Kaktovik, Point Thompson. Easterly winds to 35 knots still on Wednesday. They fall off east-northeast 25 knots, rounding out here through Utqiagvik. And then as we drop down through the lower Chukchi, northeast to north winds around 30 knots. And north winds continuing around 30 knots along the west side of the Seward Peninsula. But we do have ice building and in place in these areas. And on the north side of St. Lawrence Island toward Gamble, we could see north winds to 30 knots with waves as high as 10 to 12 feet on Wednesday.